And thanks to water privatization, is just expanding exponentially. There's increased desertification all the time because we treat water as an inanimate object, as the coal version of water and not the diamond version of water. And so she evaporates more quickly. She doesn't seep into the soils. We're actually transporting it like an inanimate object, like a resource instead of the source. We're transporting it from one watershed to another, diverting, polluting and depleting it from one place as though it's just this, infinite resource that we can abuse for our own purposes. And the more we continue to do that, it's just a disrespect of life force energy itself. And so we're going to continue to experience a dearth of vitality on the planet within and without until we recognize where vitality truly comes from. Vitality comes from the liquid life force.
Greetings and love, you beautiful humans. It's Ben, your fellow human. I have to preface this episode with a warning. I was not prepared for the mind melt that was our conversation with Isabel Friend, water ambassador, hydration biohacker, aqua sapien. You heard that right. This was the third conversation in our series on water, so I thought I was coming in with some understanding of the topic. Boy, was I wrong. This subject runs deep. If you hear clickety-clacking in the background, that's me taking notes furiously, which is to say, there is a lot of information in this one, and I'm fairly confident you will see water and hydration in a whole new light. So yeah, you might want to be seated, focused, comfortable. You know what? Listening in a bath would be highly appropriate. You ready? Here we go. Welcome back to Terrain Theory. Okay, we are live. Isabel Friend, thank you so much for joining us on the Terrain Theory podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm happy to be with you guys.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Isabel Friend, and I'm a water ambassador. I'm basically just a servant and steward and student of water. I'm obsessively fascinated with water in all of her facets, from the biological aspects of hydration and dehydration to the ecological aspects of the geopolitics of drought and desertification, to the spiritual and esoteric aspects of water in ancient indigenous teachings and modern quantum research. So anything to do with water, I'm just a giant water nerd here with you today.
Was there a specific moment that got you into water that triggered this interest?
Yeah, I would say it first started in 2009. I was living in New York City and I was a nutritionist and a health coach. And I've just always been fascinated by human optimization and how we can unlock what I believe to be infinite potential within ourselves. And at the time, I thought, well, you are what you eat. So the answer must be in our nutrition, right? So I was getting into nutrigenomics and how foraging and wildcrafting for a wild food would unlock our genetic potential in different ways. And then that's kind of when I discovered the work of Victor Schauberger and I started wildcrafting and foraging spring water instead, and realizing that, because our bodies are mostly water, you are what you eat, of course, but it's even more true that you are what you drink, and that our water actually affects our physical, mental, and emotional health more so than any other factor. And so that's kind of when I started going down that rabbit hole. And Victor Schauberger's work is absolutely groundbreaking in so many different ways. So that was what started it all.
And now, when you look at water, what do you see?
I love this question, because she is shapeless and formless, and she's like the primordial mirror, right? She's constantly reflecting us back to ourselves. So when I see water, I see the fountain of life. I think that when the esoteric life force energy wants to take form and incarnate, it does so through the body of water. And so water is the body of life, and water is also, it's been said that water is the glove on the hand of consciousness. So it's really how the spirit of divinity, however you conceive of that, call it God or whatever, takes action in the world. That's why holy water is such an important part of every single religion, because it's really the causative impetus of evolution, of growth, of change. It's the only way that solar energy takes effect on Earth. It's the only way that anything changes in our bodies or in nature is through water. And one of the conceptualizations of this infinite mystery of liquid life force that is water that I resonate with the most comes from the Kogi tribe in Colombia. And they say that water is basically a hologram of reality, that water holds the map of reality. All planes of existence, all realms from our dreams that we access through, our cerebral spinal fluid and at night and DMT release into the CSF, through to the visions that we get in medicine journeys, to our daily physical experience of reality. Everything is kind of projected through this prismatic effect of consciousness coming through water. And so water is everything. It's like Goethe said. He said, "Water is all. Water is the ground of all being." So it's hard to answer that question, but everything. Water is everything.
Yeah, the complications of unpacking water is life. We
Yeah,
simply don't have enough time.
a lifetime isn't enough time. I've been studying since 2009. I still learn something new every single day. She's such a mystery. We can barely scratch the meniscus.
It's something that we're picking up on as we have these conversations with folks who are also working with water, like Veda Austin, Dolph Suntinga, who is behind the Analemma wand and understanding structured water, and that is this appreciation for the mystery of water and this
Mhm.
embracing the pursuit of understanding that mystery,
Mhm.
in a lifetime, and also understanding that it will take more than a lifetime to perhaps understand, if we will ever fully understand the mystery that is
Absolutely.
water.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think one of the things that makes it so tricky is that most of the water that people come into contact with is not natural water. It's dead, devitalized, dormant water. And so our whole conception of what water is so limited to a very narrow experience of water, whereas the water that comes from nature is an entirely different substance. And we can
mhm.
learn so much, so many different things from that kind of water.
And we're going to get into that. Let's start first, however, with a question around dehydration.
Mm.
And I'd like to know, in your opinion, how many people out there would you say are dehydrated, and how do you define that?
So the most conservative estimates say that 70% of the population suffers from unintentional chronic dehydration. That's kind of the mainstream perspective on it scientifically. But if you talk to the scientists and clinicians who actually study phase angle and they work with hydration in their client with their clients, you'll find that across the board, they say that not a single person comes into their office regardless of whether they feel ill or well, who is not dehydrated in some way. So the number is more like 100% of the population suffers from
Right.
chronic dehydration in some way. In fact, I think there's a quote by Dr. Zach Bush who says exactly that: 100% of the population suffers from dehydration because we're living in a desert without even realizing it. All of the factors of our modern lifestyles are consistently dehydrating us. And also, we don't really have an effective definition for hydration in the modern world, which is why none of us are hydrating properly. And it's because we tend to think of hydration as being a matter of just drinking more water, right? Well, technically, that's just irrigation. And you can irrigate all day long, but that says nothing of what your body can actually absorb or what it can actually put to use. And so I think a more effective definition of hydration comes down to, it actually has very little to do with the water that you drink and has more to do with the state and the phase and the roles of biowater within your body. So I would say there's really five main factors that constitute true hydration in the body. One would be how much water can your cells absorb and retain, and that's all mitigated by the health of your cell membranes. So when we measure phase angle, which is a measurement of a person's hydration, it's an electrical signal that's brought across the cell membranes that determines the osmotic flow of water in and out of the cells. So the higher your phase angle, the higher that electrical charge equates directly to your level of hydration and how much water the cells can bring across, which I think is fascinating because again and again and again, we see that the level of energy prana, mana, chi in your body is directly proportional. It's the same measurement as your level of hydration. So the more hydrated, the more energy. So on a cellular level, it comes down to healthy cell membranes. And of course, you know, eating high quality fats and grounding and that sort of thing can really support your cell membranes to absorb and retain more water. And then the second factor would be how structured is your biowater. So you can have one cell with highly structured biowater and another cell with the same amount of biowater, but it's unstructured. And you have a healthy cell and a diseased cell that cannot function. So it's not really a matter of how much water is in our body. It largely has to do with the crystallinity of the water in our body and that structural matrix, because it's that structural matrix that's what allows water to conduct electrical signal, right? You can think of it as the difference between coal and a diamond. They're both just carbon, but they actually behave very differently because one, the carbon is completely unstructured in the case of coal, and in the case of a diamond, all those carbon atoms come together in a crystalline matrix. And our current conception of our own physiology, our current approach to medicine is basically treating human beings like they're the water equivalent of coal. And that is no wonder why we have, all these disease pathologies in the world. So really the structure, and that comes down to a lot of different lifestyle factors, is how structured your body water is. Again, has very little to do with what you drink and has everything to do with things like EMF exposure, your own states of mind, your own states of emotional cultivation, and that sort of thing will largely affect your biowaters. um, the third of the five would be your mineral composition. So basically, what are the ratios? What's the mineral profile? The level of salinity in your internal oceans. So back in the Cambrian period, when vertebrates first left the oceans, when our ancient ancestors who were born of the water and made of water first started to walk on land, the only way they were able to walk on land is by carrying the oceans with them. And even now, the only way that we can sustain terrestrially adapted bodies is because we carry oceans within ourselves. And this is so important because your blood plasma is meant to have basically the exact same mineral ratios and mineral profile of the oceans back in the Cambrian period when vertebrates first left. Like you can look at a chart of oceanic marine plasma and your blood plasma, and they're basically exactly the same. The only difference is your blood plasma has like slightly more protein anions, but other than that, exactly the same. And your cerebral spinal fluid as well, for example, like it's only one molecule different from seawater. We are walking oceans. And because we've lost touch with being, the aqua sapiens that we are, we don't pay much attention to these mineral ratios. And of course, mineral deficiency has been linked to countless disease states. So when the oceanic mineral profile starts to deviate from that baseline, then we call that another state of dehydration. So a beautiful solution to this would be quinton marine plasma, which is this incredible solution that's actually harvested from an annual plankton bloom that's vortexed up through the ocean. And IV transfusions of this can heal even genetic abnormalities. I mean, it's like one of the most healing things in the world to really restore your aquatic terrain back to its oceanic profile. So that's the third thing. And then the fourth would be, and all of these are like states of dehydration. Again, like when I say, oh, you're dehydrated, I don't mean you need to drink more water. I mean, you need to get these five things in check. Then the fourth thing would be the isotopic composition. So we all know that H2O, that water is H2O, right? When it's structured, it's more like H3O2. But regardless, the H in that formula is super important. So there was a Nobel Prize winner named Albert St. Georgi who said that hydrogen is the fuel of life. And this is so true, but really it's protium hydrogen that's the fuel of life, whereas deuterium hydrogen is really heavy and actually cannot support your body to produce metabolic energy. So there's three isotopic forms of hydrogen: protium, deuterium, and tritium. And so one iteration of dehydration is if you have too much deuterium hydrogen in your body water. And that's been linked to just a whole slew of disease pathologies. Um,
And
and
just
then,
to stop you real quick,
mhm,
deuterium water. We had a conversation with a woman on our last episode, Sarah Kleiner, who was talking a little bit about deuterium depleted water and why we
mhm,
should drink it. And so she referred to deuterium water as heavy water. So
exactly.
this is if I'm not mistaken, Mike and I were doing a little bit of research around this. This is the water that would be at the bottom of the ocean floor, tends to have high levels of deuterium in it. Is that correct? Or deuterium heavy water?
Yeah, so deuterium heavy water is actually found all over the world. It's
Okay.
found more so at lower elevations than at higher elevations. It's found more so along the equator than it is at the poles. And gradually over time, the more water in our environment is becoming destructured and polluted and divorced from the hydrological cycle, the less the hydrological cycle itself is able to deplete deuterium levels.
Okay.
So the more we drink, domesticated water, the higher it's going to be in deuterium. Also, it's present in a lot of food, of course, because food has high water content. And like for example, it's more present in fruit than it is in vegetables. It's more present in food grown in tropical climates than it is food grown in other places. So there are all these dietary regimens that you can go through to deplete your own um, deuterium in your body. And also, your body has a lot of different pathways to actually deplete deuterium if you can't drink deuterium depleted water. So there's a lot of ways to support that other than just drinking DDW or light water, but
Okay.
that's the ideal if you can get your hands on it.
In a pre-industrial time, was it less of an issue? Was it
Mm-hmm.
okay? So it's really this is a product of the industrial quote unquote revolution and just general human toxicity and the havoc that we that we bring upon this earth. It's like a modern
Absolutely.
phenomenon, is what you're saying.
Well, yes and no. So the overabundance of it absolutely is, but deuterium does play a natural role in our bodies and in nature and in the earth. It really supports growth, right? So you actually want a certain amount of deuterium when you're younger because it's going to help your body to grow and develop. But when we get this overabundance of it, as has started taking place since the Industrial Revolution, it unfortunately creates more growth of, tumors and bacteria and pathogenic organisms in our bodies and in the earth. So you don't necessarily want this like aggressive growth mentality in biowaters.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Mhm.
Sorry, we didn't mean to derail. So we were talking
No, it's great.
isotopic composition, and then
Yeah.
hydrogen as fuel. Continue.
Yeah, totally. So the fourth is about the hydrogen that's in the water. And then the fifth aspect of hydration would be really like the flow and the versatility within your biowaters. So if you have enough water in your body, but that water is stagnating in some area, like you have edema, which is the stagnation of body water, or you have, extra water weight because your body isn't cycling that water very well. If water can't cycle through your internal hydrological networks, like for example, transitioning from lymphatic fluid to blood and back again, or transitioning from the fascial network, which is basically your body's main irrigation network. It's 80% structured water and 20% proteins, and it's what delivers water to each and every cell as a hydraulic irrigation network. If it's not able to translate from the fascia into the intracellular fluid, then it's just not flowing. So I would say flow would be the fifth part of that function of hydration.
How does one address or improve that flow and versatility?
That's a great question. So, and it's I love that you asked this because this is actually the main number one or number two top thing that people overlook when they're trying to get hydrated. We think of just drinking more water, but the second factor really is movement because these networks are hydraulic networks, and hydraulic means movement by water, right? So, unlike our circulatory system, which has a heart that pumps blood, or more realistically, actually vortexes blood through the system,
Right.
our hydraulic networks like fascia and lymph, they only move when we move. So, even if you just do small movements throughout the day, small movements to us are still big movements to your cells. So rather than necessarily focusing on a lot of high intensity exercise, which is great for cardiovascular health and fitness and all of that, but when we're talking about cellular hydration, it's more about getting a diversity of novel movements. So you want to move as many different parts of your body in as many new ways as you possibly can.
That's so interesting. There are organizations out there. I'm thinking like Move Natural, who has it's almost like coaching. I think there might be a subscription service, but it's getting you to move as you were intended to move, as a human. So all those sort of
Mhm.
like you think almost primate type movements, jumping over trees, climbing trees, all fours on the ground. They try to incorporate these movements that we don't do in the day to day. And I've also in my time and in my work come across folks who are in the like physical therapy mobilization world, and they will recommend things like occlusion cuffs and blood flow restriction and like compression,
Mhm.
some of that to aid in recovery after workout, but some of that also to just improve circulation of the lymphatic system after an injury. And I'm wondering if you've come across that in uh, as a way to address this flow and versatility using like compression or any of these sort of like technologies that are meant to address movement in the lymphatic system.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a really great, I mean, if it's done well, I think that's a really great strategy for sure, especially creating compression like right around the lymph nodes, for example, because you create that compression and then when that compression releases, you get so much extra flow.
Mm,
Mhm.
amazing. Um, so these are the sort of 5 criteria by which a person evaluates their hydration or lack thereof.
Mhm.
What are some of the sort of symptoms or pathology of dehydration?
Mm. So like what form does it take or how can you tell if you're dehydrated?
Yeah, let's start with like, yeah, how can we tell other than doing the phase angle evaluations that you mentioned
Mhm.
that Zach Bush has also mentioned? Yeah, what are some ways that a person, like a listener, could go, okay, I want to find out if I'm dehydrated, and also what are these like consequences of dehydration, of chronic dehydration over time
Mhm.
as we age?
Mhm. For sure. Okay, so there's so much to unpack here. Um, well, okay, first of all, if you're listening, you're dehydrated in some way. I can guarantee you, it's again not about how much water you're drinking. Even if you drink a gallon a day, it's about the state of your internal oceans. And so, everyone suffers from unintentional chronic dehydration to some level. But actually, one of the very first um, things that happens with UCD or unintentional chronic dehydration is you actually lose the thirst signal. So if we're relying on thirst to tell us whether or not we're dehydrated, by the time you actually get thirsty, it's gone too far. Because over the years, your body is really intelligent, right? So it's going to adapt. And if it learns over time that sending you a thirst signal is not necessarily going to mean that it's getting the right isotopic ratios of hydrogen or the right mineral composition or whatever, then it's going to revert to other signals. And your body is basically, as Dr. Batman Gellage says, your body is basically a sophisticated system of thirst signals. It is a body of water, right? We all say that you're 70% water, and that's true by volume, but by molecular count, you're 99.92% water molecules. Out of every 1,000 molecules in your body, 999 of them are water. So, what happens when it starts to go out of balance is really common symptoms are like brain fog, moodiness, trouble concentrating, headaches, issues with sleep, issues with metabolism, cravings, weight gain, things that are enormously common in our society, but nobody thinks to trace them back to dehydration. Another thing that Dr. Batman Gellage says is that pretty much all states of disease are just synonyms that we use to describe various states of dehydration. And when your body waters go out of balance in the ways that we talked about before, depending on your unique genetic makeup, that could express itself as various disease states, but ultimately they're all traceable back to dehydration. So your body uses water to buffer every single stressor that comes about, right? Like your terrain is an aquatic terrain, it's an aquarium matrix, it's an aquarium milieu. Your cells are aquatic organisms. Your microbiome, they're aquatic organisms, right? If we keep treating our bodies as though we are made of solids, then we're only going to be addressing the one molecule out of the 1,000 and continue ignoring the 999. It's Occam's razor, right? The simplest solution is usually true. And in a body that's made of water, you know, anytime any kind of symptom manifests, no matter how mild it might be, water metabolism disturbance should be narrowed out first as a causative factor before we look to these other causative factors. Like say you have an issue with your amino acid profile, for example, and you want to start taking, tryptophan and lysine and all these different things because you've traced some, metabolic process or symptom you're experiencing in your life. Well, surrounding every single protein is 10,000 water molecules. We look at the protein, we're like, let me address this protein, but actually it can't fold or function without the proper structure and profile and isotopic composition, etc., of the water molecules surrounding it. And so what happens when all of this goes out of balance, as it inevitably does, leading the modern lifestyle divorced from nature, is that the body starts to develop drought management regulators, right? So it starts rationing your body water away from less essential areas and just rationing the water towards your essential survival functions, right? Um, and some of these drought management regulators that it releases are like histamines and prostaglandins. And even though histamines do help the body to redirect water and to use it more efficiently because there's such a limited amount or limited healthy water, it also creates this cascade of issues in the body like inflammation and allergies and a suppressed immune system because it can actually affect the way that your bone marrow produces white blood cells, and then you get this suppressed immune system response, and there's just like a whole cascade of things that happen. And again, look at any disease pathology and you can trace it right back to your aquatic terrain. Like, for example, they've done NMR imaging scans on the cytoplasm of people who have cancer, AIDS, diabetes. Doesn't matter. They all have the same destructuring of the cytoplasmic fluid, the intracellular fluid. There's no crystallinity left, so it cannot conduct the electrical charges. It can't conduct the energy. And I think it's especially interesting with cancer pathology, particularly because, well, first of all, because we're in just such a pandemic of cancer in the world. And most people don't realize that it is a state of dehydration. Like if you measure the phase angle of someone with cancer, inevitably they're going to come in at about 4.5 or below, which shows that just from a hydration standpoint, they're so dry that they're nearly dead. 4.5 or below is an incredibly low reading. Like the highest reading you could have if you were a brand newborn baby would be about a 12, right? And then most of the population is around like 6, 7, 8. And then if you have
What
any
is,
kind
sorry to interrupt. What is this measurement?
the phase
This is
angle.
the phase angle. Okay.
Yeah, can
Mhm.
you can you unpack that a little bit? Because I've heard Zach Bush talk about it. That was the first time I heard it. Now I'm hearing you mention it, and I'd love to know how does that work? How do you take that measurement?
Yeah, it's a really simple measurement. You just put a little thing on your finger and it passes an electromagnetic signal through the body, and it basically measures how quickly and efficiently the cell membrane is able to bring that electric charge across. And then that also tells you how quickly and efficiently it's able to conduct the osmotic flow of water in and out of the cells.
Wow, it's literally checking your current, like
Yeah.
how efficiently the current is moving through your body.
Yeah. Well, water is the superconductor of your body.
Yeah, Isabel, I just want to
Yeah.
honor how articulate you are on all
Oh,
this, and
thank
it's just beautiful to hear you speak. And often in these interviews, I just sit back and enjoy the ride because it's a beautiful ride. And but I just want to throw a couple of things in here that have crossed my mind because we talk a lot about root cause on this show, and you're getting right to the heart of it, and it just seems so obvious, like you said, like 99%, you can make a case that we're 99% water, and that's
Mhm.
not the first thing that comes up in a root cause conversation, if the root cause conversation even comes up at all,
Mhm.
is madness. We talk about how important words are. um,
Mhm.
I mean, the specificity of words and when we use words, and things that were taught as children that we consider gospel, like water and electricity don't mix. Like that's something we all grow up thinking, but the ramifications of that are pretty detrimental, because it's all about how water and electricity do mix within you. That essentially is your phase angle, right? Is what I'm
Yeah.
learning. Um, and so recontextualizing, you use the term aqua sapiens. That's something I'm certainly going to trot out casually in conversation from here on out, because, like I said, words do matter. And if we can start to change the conversation by saying things like aqua sapiens, or referring to the water we drink as industrial water as opposed to
Mhm.
whatever natural water, because there is a difference. It's not just one thing. And referring to water as she and her is just so beautiful. It ties back to what I think is an intuition we all feel, whether
Mm.
it's referring to the earth as Mother Nature, and the earth being primarily a water planet. So, all these things, I just want to tip my hat to you and say thank you for the elegance, grace, articulation,
Mm.
wisdom. Keep it coming.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you so much for that reflection. I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate it. And it's so fun to talk about. I mean, I could just geek out on this stuff for days and days,
Yeah,
you
same
guys.
here.
Like,
Well, and also this is the terrain theory podcast, and you're really pointing to, again, what seems so obvious is, like, I just started. I'm a novice gardener, right? As a musician for 20 years, so I was just never home. I've been home, so I've been gardening, but like sometimes you water the garden, and water doesn't actually like seep into the soil; it just
mhm.
runs off. And again, it's a perfect analogy where you can, like, for hydration versus irrigation, like you're saying, and like the terrain is really relevant. It's like, a magnet. You need both sides to make a connection. You need soil that can actually absorb water, and you need water that's actually um, structured, healthy, uh, deuterium depleted. All these things that I'm learning about. Uh, Once again, here we are.
Totally. I love that you brought this up because I'm actually working on creating an e-course specifically for farmers and gardeners. Like currently I have an e-course that's about external water, that's like drinking water, how to bring your drinking water back to life. I have an e-course that's all about your internal waters, your aquatic terrain, and then the next course that I'm working on to kind of finish the trio is specifically what you just mentioned. Like how does the water that we use in agriculture actually affect the biophotonic radiation, the nutrient availability of the food? How does it affect the soil microbiome? How can we actually increase the yields, make sure that the soil is absorbing the water and thereby drawing down more carbon? We can actually use less water and get far greater yields from the food just by using the right kinds of water and really understanding the living sentience of water. If we treat it as an inanimate object, it's not going to create animacy and life and vitality in the food that we grow with it. Whereas if we uplift it into its living state, it's incredible what happens. It increases the soil microbiome, the diversity of the microbiome in the soil. It does the same thing in our bodies.
Right.
You don't necessarily have to swallow prebiotic and probiotic
Yeah.
supplements every
Yeah.
day, although I think that can be a great strategy. But even just the water that we drink actually supports a healthy microbiome expression within our bodies as well. It's as within, so without, right? I
Well,
think if water teaches
exactly.
us anything, it teaches us that.
Well, and you just took the words out of my mouth, thinking about like the desertification of certain parts of our planet. And that's just really dehydration on an Earth scale, right? And I can't help
Mhm.
but think, as we begin to heal and rehydrate with purpose, that the Earth will only respond in kind, as a mirror, as a reflection of our healing, because as we know, it's all one thing.
I fully believe that. It goes back to what we were saying in the beginning, right? That water is holographic in nature. When we address
Yes.
our inner waters, we address our outer waters and vice versa. Most people don't realize that the inflammation they experience in certain parts of their body is localized drought. If you have chronic
Right.
pain in certain parts of your body, it's traceable to localized drought. I mean, inflammation in Latin literally comes from inflammatio, meaning to set on fire. What do you do when you have a fire? You want to put it out with water. So our bodies, with this epidemic of inflammation, our bodies are crying out for water. And of course, we see the same thing. We're just smaller versions of Mother Earth. We're just microcosms of the macrocosm. And our Mother Earth is crying out for the same thing. She's experiencing localized drought And thanks to water privatization, is just expanding exponentially. There's increased desertification all the time because we treat water as an inanimate object, as the coal version of water and not the diamond version of water. And so she evaporates more quickly. She doesn't seep into the soils. We're actually transporting it like an inanimate object, like a resource instead of the source. We're transporting it from one watershed to another, diverting, polluting and depleting it from one place as though it's just this, infinite resource that we can abuse for our own purposes. And the more we continue to do that, it's just a disrespect of life force energy itself. And so we're going to continue to experience a dearth of vitality on the planet within and without until we recognize where vitality truly comes from. Vitality comes from the liquid life force.
Yeah. So well said.
It all just seems so obvious when we have these conversations. So carry on. Yeah.
Thank you, Isabel. I want to go back real quick to the phase angle, and that getting that tested for the individual, for the listener. Is that a device that is easily accessible, or is that something that you'd want to go to like a practitioner to get? How easy is it to get your phase angle tested?
You can find a practitioner who will do it. The devices aren't necessarily super accessible, but there are a lot of clinicians who can do that.
Okay. And then
Mhm.
I also had a follow-up question just as we were exploring the pathology of dehydration and the examination of a cancer patient coming in at like 4.5 or below, and that dehydration is sort of the root cause of what we call illness or disease. Are you aware of instances where a person with either cancer or one of these like chronic illnesses healed just through better hydration?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, there are so many different kinds of therapeutic waters that are just waters that are either arranged in a certain way or have a certain isotopic profile or have a certain mineral profile that are, I hesitate to say this because of, whatever AI is listening, but curative,
Mm-hmm.
legitimately curative. And
Mm-hmm.
in addition, hydration protocols where we can look at a full spectrum hydration approach that addresses the lifestyle factors, the diet, blah, blah, blah. So, not just the water itself that you're drinking, but making sure that your body is really primed to absorb and retain bio water and to produce its own metabolic water. So, the overall hydration protocol that can be enormously curative as well. Um, and there are so many examples of this. It's just I'm bubbling over to want to share them all. But I think it's important to really understand, like, really when it comes to oncology specifically, like there are three main factors of your aquatic terrain when it comes to oncology, right? There's dehydration, which includes the depletion of your amount of water and the oceanic mineral profile being thrown off balance. So there's dehydration. There's deuteration, which is increased deuterium in the body water. And then there's the destructuring of the biowater. So I would say those are like the three or four main Ds of oncology. There's dehydration, demineralization, deuteration, and destructuring, right? And so when we look at how those manifest, there's different strategies that can address each one of those individually. There are some strategies that can address all of them as a whole, but it's like cancer can be traced to each of these. So, take dehydration, for example. If you're dehydrated because you don't have enough water, or like we talked about in step 5 before of hydration, if that water isn't flowing well between the different hydrological systems of your body, then you're going to get stagnation of toxins and stagnation of lymph. And that toxicity is going to build up and create more acidification. And then, one of the main strategies that your body has for targeting acidification is amino acids that act as antioxidants, right? And so, antioxidant amino acids like tryptophan and tyrosine and lysine and these different ones, they also require water in order to function. So if they don't have enough water to function, they're not going to fulfill their antioxidant capacities. Toxins are going to build up. You're going to get an acidic environment, and you know eventually that's just gonna you need to take internal showers. In other words, like if you didn't shower for 6 months, you would be really grody and really gross, and you would probably develop some infections. And the same thing is true inside of ourselves, right? Like it's we need to take internal showers. And then the next thing, and also the acidity is exacerbated by the demineralization of the bio waters as well. So then the next thing would be like the cell receptors on your cells um, have a huge role to play in the pathology of cancer. If your body is really dehydrated, like you mostly function on hydroelectric energy. Like the majority of the energy you get in your body is not from calories that you eat, it's mostly hydroelectric energy, right? But if your body isn't able to get enough hydroelectric energy because there's not enough water, it's going to start to eat its own proteins, right? It's going to start the process of autophagy in different levels. And while in some senses autophagy can be great, if it goes out of balance, it's really not, because you can actually cannibalize your own proteins, some of which are really necessary. So, what you see with dehydration is sometimes the body will start to cannibalize its own cell receptors, which are made of proteins, and then the cells lose touch with their environment. And so there's no more cell to cell signaling. And this is what you see with cancer cells is basically they become aberrant. They have no communication with the extracellular fluid. They start behaving in aggressively individualistic ways, and then they clump together and form these tumor growths. And then again, there's also the histamine pathways that when you're dehydrated, you produce more histamine, and then the histamine I mean, long story short, at first it creates an aggressive immune response, but then it ends up depressing the immune system and going after the white blood cells that are generated in the bone marrow, and so that then you have less white blood cell response to go after any kind of tumor growth that might be developing. So that's kind of the first D of oncology, which would be the dehydration. How does that dehydration manifest towards cancer? Would be kind of that pathway, those 4 or 5 steps. And then the deuteration, of course, if you have an overabundance of deuterium in the intracellular fluid, you get molecular crowding because the water molecules are too big. Like deuterium is heavy hydrogen, it has an extra neutron. So it's like twice the size of protium hydrogen. It's really big, it's really bulky. And again, it nourishes tumor growth, nourishes bacterial growth. It can actually deuterate your DNA. So then your DNA stops replicating ideally. And deuterium depleted water is one of the water therapeutic waters that has actually been used to treat cancer. So in Hungary, it's actually approved as a cancer treatment, and there have been so many studies on its effectiveness in treating cancer, like even double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized phase 2 clinical trials, which is like the gold standard of trials, have found DDW or light water to be one of the most effective things in cancer treatment. There's other kinds of water too, like the Canton marine plasma that we discussed before has also been used in cancer treatment. There's double helix water has been used in cancer treatment. There's just, I mean, of course, hydrogen rich water. We could get into that. That's another kind of therapeutic water that has been used in cancer treatment. So that's the other D of oncology. But stop me if I'm just going off on
No, no,
tangents
no.
and
This is
rambling
great.
here. But
This is great.
Like I said,
okay.
we just sort of bathe in the wisdom so it's great. But I don't mean to keep like bringing us back to this like philosophical place, but it's just what's on my mind, and I can't help but think that so many of these issues, for lack of a better term, that we're constantly barraged with, and it would just be solved by the word respect, like if
Mhm.
and like reflecting back to like, and I want to be careful about like romanticizing or oversimplifying like indigenous ways, but like when we are living in accordance with like a more natural respect based way of organizing life, like you don't need all the labs and the science, and it's like it just respect is, by some order of magnitude, it just makes all the other like retro fixing that we're trying to do on the back end irrelevant. If we could
Mhm.
just get like back in line with what, to me, and I think you and Ben, like in our hearts, know is just a common sense approach to treating each other and the world with respect, it
Mhm.
takes care of everything. it, it sounds
It's true.
oversimplified, but it's just
But
amazing
it's
to
true.
hear, well, there's this water and we can do this, we can make this and this atom and molecular, and it's like as human beings we're always trying to like fix and repair, but the world is so infinitely wise that it comes fully formed, repaired before we go in and ruin it. And
Mhm.
it just never ceases to amaze me. So I don't feel particularly articulate today, but I keep coming back to that if is respect. I don't even know if respect is the right word, but I just want to keep bringing it back to that because I know you're aware of that, and and just trying to
Yeah.
add that back into the conversation.
It's so true. Really, having respect and right relationship and reciprocity with water, I think, would solve all of humanity's toughest questions. Whether we're talking about the medical crises that we're in as a species, or we're talking about the agricultural crises that we're in as a species, the climate crisis can even be solved through reciprocal respect with hydrological cycles. Free energy, the energy crisis. I mean, free energy can literally be generated by the implosive forces of water. It's incredible, whether we're talking about answers to sociology, to economics, to politics. My research over the past, 13 years now just keeps leading me back to the ways that water, as the source of life, provides answers for how we can live in harmony with life and with nature in all of these different ways. And it comes back to exactly what you said. It comes back to restoring that right relationship with water. Fundamentally, when we're in right relationship with water, we're in right relationship with life. We're in right relationship with ourselves and each other as bodies of water. She fundamentally teaches us how to be better humans.
Thank you. Beautiful.
And lest we lose that thread, there was a third aspect to oncology.
Yes. So the last D is destructuring, the destructuring of the biowaters. So this part is really crucial because we've just been wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars in cancer research looking at oncogenes specifically, thinking that the nature of cancer has to be centered in the nucleus somehow. It has to be a genetic expression somehow. And yet we've seen over and over again that it has far more to do with the destructuring of the biowaters. So, like, if your biowater is destructured and you have oncogenes, then that state of dehydration is more likely to express as cancer than it would if you have destructuring of biowater and, a genetic profile that is more inclined to something else, for example. But that doesn't mean that the cancer originates with the oncogenes. And we can see this in studies, for example, where they take a healthy cell and they explant the nucleus into the cytoplasm of another healthy cell. The progeny of that cell will, as we would anticipate, be perfectly healthy. Then they take the nucleus of a cancer cell and they explant that into the cytoplasm of a healthy cell. Well, according to this oncogene theory, you would expect the progeny to then be cancerous cells. But that's not what we see. They're healthy cells because there's a healthy cytoplasm, which is intracellular fluid. It's all fluidic. 70% of the cell is water. And by molecular count, that's 99.9% of the cell is water, right? So what they see instead is that if you take a healthy cell and you explant a healthy nucleus into a cancerous cytoplasm, then the progeny are cancerous. And that alone shows us right there that the pathology of cancer is in the cytoplasm. And there's a lot of factors that go into that, like, the ATP synthase. And there's actually a lot of really interesting research by Gilbert Ling about the role of ATP not as actually being an energy macromolecule, but as actually being what structures biowater. So it's not that the ATP provides energy for the cell, that it has fundamentally no more energy than anything else does, but that the biowater is actually the battery. It's what carries the charge, but the ATP is what converts it into structured water. So, another thing that happens with cancer is you get all of these, issues in the mitochondria because of the Ds that we just talked about before. That expresses in the ways that the mitochondria is able to generate ATP. And then it's just a vicious cycle because if the ATP isn't generated enough or generated properly, it can't structure the cytoplasm. And, again, it's a vicious cycle. But I really love this analogy. I think this analogy is from Dr. Tom Cowan. can't recall where exactly it comes from, but basically, I think it is. But basically, you can think of it as like making jello, right? So
Yeah.
another word for structured water or crystalline water is easy water, exclusionary zone water, or gel phase water, because it kind of is coherent like a gel, almost like jello inside of the cells, right? Well, if you're making jello, how do you make it? You need some kind of protein like the gelatin and water. But if you put those two together alone, it's not going to make jello, right? The gelatin's just going to be a sediment down at the bottom. um, it's not going to become a solute. What you need to actually create jello is heat, some sort of radiant energy. And the heat, when you boil the water, it creates the jello. Well, basically, that's what ATP is for the cellular fluid. The ATP is kind of like the radiant heat that actually causes the proteins in the cell to relax into this gel phase.
Yeah, it is Tom
So,
Cowan. I've heard
yeah,
Tom talk about that, and for the listener and for myself as well, remind us what ATP stands for.
adenosine triphosphate.
Great, thank you. Because you get into these conversations, we start tossing around all these
Yeah.
acronyms, and it's good to come in for landing for us mere mortals. So thank you for that.
Sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. I mean, Ben and I,
If I get too technical with anything,
no,
just
it's
stop
it's
me.
it's it's absolutely the best, and we love it. But Ben and I, we're not medical trained at all, so
Me
sometimes
either.
we're just like, well, but okay, fair enough. But thank you for that. Just here and there, nice to clarify.
Yeah.
I appreciate
Well,
that.
I figure your listenership is probably, I would imagine you probably have like a lot of biohackers in your audience and, real health nuts like us, huh?
It's a good, I think it's a good mix. And so as we've covered a little bit about a lot about dehydration.
Mhm.
And it's not just about, obviously, as you've mentioned, and this is oversimplification, but drinking more water isn't going to lead to better hydration alone.
Mhm.
Drinking the right water can go a long way. And so
Mhm.
I think the next question is, how do you recreate the highest quality bioavailable water?
Yes. So I have a 5-step process for this. I love to break things down into these these steps. So hopefully this will help. If you could just remember these steps: filter, structure, balance, energize, and embody. And actually, there's a 6th step, which comes first, which is if you can forage for wild crafted living water, find your local springs, go to findaspring.com and get your water straight from nature, then you can skip all the rest of the steps because you've already got the best medicine that nature can provide,
Hmm.
right? But in cases where that's not accessible for people, what we want to do is just recreate what nature does. So all of these steps basically just mimic exactly what happens at a spring so that we can take denatured, devitalized, and domesticated water and bring it back to its spring quality state. And so the first thing that we do would be to filter the water, get a really high quality filter. I have my favorite ones are curated in a directory at waterislife.shop in the filtration collection. Then you want to structure the water. Again, my favorite water structures are all in a curated collection over there, waterslife.shop. Filter, structure, balance. So the balance step is basically the mineralization and the aeration. So just like us, water needs to be clean and have good hygiene. That's the filtration step. Just like us, water needs community and relationships to stay really healthy. They've found that's one of the most influential factors in human health is, do you have strong family and connections and all of that? And that's really the molecular connections of structured water. So we want to make sure that she's well connected. And so that's the structure step. And then in the balance step, we make sure that she's eating and breathing. So just the way that we need to take in the earth element when we eat, water needs to take in the earth element when she consumes minerals and electrolytes. And just like we need to breathe, water needs to be aerated or to have a good profile of dissolved gases like oxygen and hydrogen. So, adding extra hydrogen back to your water or aerating it to get a good airflow in there through vortexing or something like that. So, that's balance. Energize is basically like the same reason we need to spend time in the sun, and we need to ground our feet on the earth, and we need to have healthy stimuli around us. We need to not just watch horror movies all day long. We need to have, to learn interesting things. All of this keeps us healthy and well-rounded, and the same is true of water. So she needs to have positive stimuli in her environment. She's been called the sensory organ of the universe because she's constantly sensing and perceiving and taking in information, electromagnetic information, the full light spectrum, as I'm sure you covered when you had Dolph on the podcast. She's constantly listening. She's constantly tasting. When you taste water, she's tasting you.
Mm.
When you see water, she's seeing you. And so having this relationship where we recognize that we're actually patterning the water with whatever she's exposed to, especially when she's structured. So the water that's in a formation can store information. And that's why it's important for water to not just be structured, but also to be energized. I love the Analemma wand, of course, for getting like a full spectrum of electromagnetic profile in there. There's also ways that you can work with specific bandwidths of the electromagnetic spectrum for whatever your unique purposes might be through like creating infoceutical water, for example. So if you want, like, I know I need this supplement, then you can just pattern your water with the frequency of that supplement. Or one of my favorite things to do is to pattern my water with oxytocin, because it just gives this like beautiful, loving energy throughout the day. There's even frequencies specifically for like entheogens. You can pattern your water with psilocybin, or
Yeah, we
it's
got
fun.
into this with Veda at the very end of our conversation. That's right.
And so when you say, yeah, I piggyback off that. When you say pattern water with the frequency of something, what comes to mind is what Veda would do, and that would be write the word
Mhm.
psilocybin under the petri dish and then crystallize it. And is that similar? Is that how you would pattern with like oxytocin? Would you write the word oxytocin, or for a supplement, would you just bring the supplement into the vicinity of the water that you're about to drink?
So there's a few ways of doing it. One is to write the word on the paper. One that I prefer, just because I know for sure that it creates a lot of coherent structure around that frequency in the water, is through using infoceutical devices like infopathy devices, where you can actually select from a list of thousands of different electromagnetic stimuli. Again, it's available at waterslife.shop. If you go to the energizers section, you'll find all the details on that. But there's basically this infoceutical pad that transduces the frequency of whatever that thing is into the water, and it literally vibrates the molecules of the water with that pattern.
So that device has been programmed with the
Hmm.
specific, electromagnetic signature of the thing that you're trying to pattern into the water.
Well, the device is just a general like amplifier,
Okay.
and then you subscribe to, I think it's only like $10 a month or something like that, to a subscription where you get access to every frequency in existence.
Oh, that's
Not in existence, but tons of frequencies. They're adding new ones all the time.
gotcha. So you go through that. So you subscribed, and then you go find oxytocin, and then you put the water on that pad, and then you're
Mhm.
patterning that water with oxytocin or
Yeah.
whatever. That's
Or like before we came online together today, I did a full nootropic stack and like alpha GPC and a bunch of brain mushrooms and brain stimulants and that sort of thing, just so I could be at your level and meet you guys.
Well,
that's amazing, and I feel like that's the opposite. We are not at your level, and I'm going to need to invest in this thing ASAP.
but
It's a
you said
cool.
at the before you dove into this list, which is wonderful. You said at the very beginning that if you can just drink from a stream,
Yeah.
that you can almost it's you can skip all these steps.
Well, not a stream, a spring. Did I
Spring.
mishear you?
No, no,
Hmm.
spring.
A spring.
I misspoke. You're right. A spring. Yep.
Absolutely. Because again, for your daily drinking water, you want water that has the entire palette of colors or the entire spectrum of electromagnetic frequencies that it can paint with, so that it can choose what it wants to conduct into your cells. Like, for example, water in nature is going to be exposed to the Schumann resonance and to the frequencies of the sun and the moon and the stars, to the sounds of bird songs, to the sounds of wind rustling in trees, to the subtle geomagnetic influences of whatever rocks are in the stream. And then also over the course of the seasons, it's going to be exposed in different ways to these different cycles. Water reacts differently in the winter than she does in the springtime, than she does in the summer. And so water in nature is really patterned to be full spectrum, enormously intelligent, or what Victor Schauberger would call mature water. Most of us are drinking juvenile, immature water that actually robs vitality from the body, robs energy from the body, robs minerals from the body. It's actually most of the water that people drink is dehydrating them over time. And so, in order for our bodies to be truly hydrated, we want to drink mature water. So that's why we take it through all these steps just to mimic what nature does. And again, with the infopathy, this is more of like at least for me and in my strategy, it's more of an occasional water when I need something specific. But like my all day drinking water would be something that has the full spectrum profile.
This is really feeling like a eureka moment for me. Just having gone through life up to this point as like an athlete, feeling like I sweat a lot when I work out, so I'll drink more water, and and connecting the dots on any sort of like health issue I've had across my past and tracing it back to this, it's a complete misunderstanding, lack of understanding around what is hydration
Mhm.
and the nuance of water. And it really just feels like a eureka moment that I feel like this is a line of demarcation in my life, like the
Mm.
before and the after. And I don't wish to rush this conversation
Mm.
and get to its end, but I feel like I want to, just because I need to start taking steps. Like I'm ready. Like
Mhm.
I'm thinking, okay, there are so many things that I now want to do, and I've taken notes. I've never in the history of this podcast taken as many notes as I've had. I feel like I'm in a lecture hall. It's amazing. Okay, let's. I don't want to miss any threads here. Embody was one of those
Yes.
steps. What is that?
So embody, so filter, structure, balance, energize, and embody. Embody is less to do with our actual drinking water and bringing it back to spring quality and more to do with just making sure that those 5 factors of internal hydration are on point. So those are the lifestyle practices. Embody is what we're doing on a daily basis to make sure that the water is actually absorbing and converting very well in our bodies.
Okay,
Mhm.
which you spoke a little bit about earlier.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I would say the main things that get overlooked are like EMF exposure,
Hmm.
because our cells literally cannot absorb water if we're in the presence of strong man made EMFs, because again, it's an electrical signal that allows the osmotic flow, and cell membranes and gap junctions, et cetera, can all start to resonate at the wrong frequency. Also, having a really healthy microbiome is a huge factor in dehydration, which is, again, it's like an infinite loop. You know, if you're better hydrated, you're going to have a healthier microbiome. If you have a health, and vice versa, you know, if you don't have a healthier microbiome, you're not going to be able to hydrate very well. Another factor, like we talked about earlier, is movement practices. There's a lot that goes into the whole lifestyle part of it. And if there's any single thing I would want listeners to take away from this podcast, well, first it's go forage for wild water at findaspring.com. Get real water. But then the second thing, and I think the biggest thing that is misperceived in my work in general, is people think, oh, it's just about the water that you drink. And even though there's 4 steps leading up to that fifth one, the fifth one is the bulk of where your energy and your work goes into. Like the bulk of hydration practices, our lifestyle practices, it has very little to do with the water that you drink.
A question about foraging.
Mhm.
I do have access to springs around me. A couple questions. One, what would you advise to a person who it's going to take them a half an hour to go to a spring and they want to fill up as much as possible? What should they be filling up in? Does that matter?
Yeah. I would say just get started with whatever you have. Like, meet yourself where you're at. You can take baby steps. Eventually, of course, you can get glass carboys. There's some amazing big glass bottles, again, available at waterslife.shop. So, actually, I have all kinds of foraging tools, spring water harvesting tools, test kits, et cetera, available on there so people can get everything they need. But really, just get started. Even if you're going with plastic bottles at first, don't be daunted by doing it perfectly.
And then thank you for that. And then spring wells. So if you have a house and you've got a natural spring and you've sort of tapped into that spring water on your property, then pulled it into your house, like is that essentially the same thing?
No,
No.
no. So when people say they have a spring fed well, really it's like an underground aquifer
Yeah.
that they're tapping into. And it's kind of a misnomer because people think that because spring water comes from an aquifer and, artesian well water comes from an aquifer, that they're basically the same kind of water. But there is this maturation process that water goes through during the process of being born, literally born from, coming up from the depths of the earth. Like she's gestating in the womb of Mother Earth, and then the birth process gives her all of these properties and capacities that do not happen when she's artificially pumped up. That's basically like the difference between taking a baby from C-section after 4 or 5 months versus being born at full term after 9 months. Nature has her own timing in the process of things, so you're going to have a greater amount of ormus elements at spring water. You're going to have a higher hydrogen content. It's going to be the right temperature, which is usually, especially the higher springs, is going to be right around 4 degrees Celsius. There's just a number of factors that water really needs to go through the process of birth at a spring.
Okay. That's an,
Not to say that well water is bad, it's one of it's maybe like my second or third favorite kind of water, but you will still want to go through this process with well water, the structure, balance, and energize. You might not need to filter it. It depends on the profile. There's also I don't mean to keep plugging this site, but it does have a lot of resources. There's a section on there on waterslife.shop where you can actually send in a sample of your well water, have it tested, and then have a system built specifically for your unique water to make sure that it is well filtered depending on its level of salinity and hardness and all of that, and structured and very customized.
I spent way too much time on that site, and I think I've identified like 20 things that I'm going to be purchasing just to dial this in. It doesn't feel like too great an investment is
Mm.
possible in this sort of area of one's life.
Yeah. Well, if I could just um simplify things, because I know it does seem like, oh, there's all of these strategies and all these tools and all of these steps. And so for years I've been teaching these steps. And it was actually only just last year that I discovered one tool that does all the steps. So usually I tell people you want to get at least one tool for each of the steps. And then there are some tools that will overlap and do multiple steps. Like there are a lot of structures that will also energize, and, there are a lot of aerators that will also structure, etc. So you could get one or two tools for each thing. But there's one thing that does it all that I'm like obsessed with now that I have to share with people. It's called the Spring Aqua, and you can find it in the filter collection of waterslife.shop. And it filters incredibly well, structures incredibly well, aerates, energizes, and it infuses the water with molecular hydrogen without electrolysis. So it doesn't, a lot of the molecular hydrogen machines, they're literally electrocuting the water with this strong DC voltage, man made current just to get the hydrogen out, which ruins the structure, like Kangen machines and all that kind of stuff. Whereas this is actually based on the hydrology of Mother Earth. So basically, they're recreating the geology of, I don't know if you're familiar with the spring at Lourdes, France, and Bernadette's Grotto, but it's one of the most healing miracle waters in the entire world. I mean, pilgrims will travel, thousands of miles to get water from this one spring. I made a pilgrimage to get water from this one spring, and it's like, oh. So basically, they're trying to recreate spring water under your sink, and they've done an amazing job. It's not a machine like some of these other things. It doesn't require electricity. It's literally just like a mini hydrological cycle that you can put under your sink.
Amazing.
Incredible.
And
Okay.
then
Well,
the other
Mhm.
website you mentioned, findaspring.com.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a user supported website. So if you know of a spring that's not on there yet, please upload it and share with the community.
and let's shift gears to the community and talk about the American Water Trust. I
Mhm.
want to learn a little bit more about that and how you got involved.
Yeah, so the American Water Trust is basically an organization that was founded in order to support indigenous populations to reclaim sovereignty over their own water, and all throughout the Americas, and really to have the tools to bring that water back to life. Um, and not from a place of just um, implementing systems, but really like drawing forth their own indigenous wisdom and just creating a platform that can easily be scaled to um, all of the tribal communities throughout the Americas. And yeah, I'm really grateful and thankful to have the honor of being the president of the American Water Trust. And yeah, we want to support Indigenous people to get their land back and get their water back. Unfortunately, there are Indigenous tribes all over the Americas that have no access to clean water. You know, the Navajo have been without clean water for 70 years. And I really think that part of restoring right relationship, like we were saying earlier, with the element of water is recognizing that the vast majority of water is stolen. It's from stolen land, and we need to restore that harmony. We might be working with the Cree up in Canada to rewild a river. So they have a river up near Quebec that is has been massively polluted, diverted, depleted, so we're going to be hopefully helping them with really restoring it to health and wellness. And all of the technologies that we use are based on biomimicry. So they're based on basically just allowing the water itself to guide its own healing process, and then just stepping in with tools and alchemical processes along the way to support its ability to do that.
That's amazing. We will put a link in the show notes to the American Water Trust as well, and I imagine on the site it's pretty clear how the listener could get involved and help, donate, and
More or less, we're not a nonprofit, so we don't accept donations.
okay.
But yeah, if you want to support the work, you can sign up for the newsletter and stay in touch. Let us know if there are any yeah, projects that need attention in your area.
Amazing. Isabel, what does the future of water look like in your world?
Hmm. Well, again, land back and water back. I think decolonizing water has to be a big part of it. We have to decolonize our relationship to water and just restoring respect and dignity to this being who gives us life, restoring a sense of autonomy back to her, recognizing that she has her own will, she has her own life cycle. She needs to go through that full life cycle from gestation to birth to youth to maturation to old age and then death as she evaporates and then rains back down and to seep into the aquifers again to begin another incarnation all over. And when we step in and interrupt that life cycle, inevitably we create denatured water that translates to denaturing our own bodies, right? Denaturing our habitats, denaturing our ecosystem. And I think the more sovereignty, autonomy, and respect we can give to water as a living being, the healthier and happier and more vibrant and vital we all will be, because the foundation of any good relationship is good communication, recognizing and respecting the other person's needs and desires and their love languages. You know, when you understand water's needs and desires and what it takes for her to thrive, then we all thrive. What we do to the waters outside of us, we do to the waters inside of us, and vice versa. As long as we think she's just a thing to use for our purposes, she's not getting her needs met, and neither are we.
Preach. Here's a question we ask all our guests. What are your non-negotiables and the habits that you do every day to improve your health, tend to your terrain? I suspect it'll have something to do with water.
Yeah, I like to drink a lot of water. um, I actually don't drink as much as people probably think I might, because the high quality, the better the quality of the water that you drink, the less you really need to drink. But I don't have anything that's like a non-negotiable daily practice, but I do have things that I like to incorporate in my lifestyle in general, like, you know, being in nature as much as I can, going to the ocean, visiting cenotes, you know, watching the sunrise as often as I can. I love sun gazing in the mornings. Actually, no, prayer. I would say prayer and meditation are like a daily non-negotiable. It doesn't feel like a non-negotiable because I'm not like regimented about it, but it always happens every day and I can't go a day without it. So that's probably my number one.
It's beautiful. And then where can the listener learn more about you?
So my main website is waterslife.love. The shop is waterslife.shop. I have an academy where I teach courses and have free webinars and workbooks that you can get, and that's waterslife.teachable.com. And I post a lot on Instagram. That's my name at Jen Isabel Friend. There's also a Telegram group. You can sign up for the newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter at waterslife.love. Um, I'm in a lot of places. Please reach out and find me. I would love to hear from your audience and get to know them.
Isabel Friend, thank you so much for coming on and sharing the wealth of knowledge on water and doing all that you do to transform our relationship and understanding to, as you say, the sentient being that we would not exist without.
Mm. Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's really been a pleasure to chat with you guys.
And now for the after party. Michael,
Benjamin.
Isabel Friend.
Oh, you done did it again, Benny.
I, I've just I've got it. I've had it all wrong. Is how I feel.
I know. I know. Every week we talk to somebody and you think like that's here we go. Like another step further down the destination. I feel like we just fucking like are you know, a lifetime further down the road after that conversation.
What I was doing in my head, and I'm probably going to need some quiet time to do this, but I'll do it now. I'll stumble through this now awkwardly. Is try to find overlaps between some of the past guests we've had who've talked about what is illness. So Don and David are the first to come to mind, and Tom Cowan as well. What really makes us ill? He had that conversation too. So lack of nutrition, right, was one of them. But EMF exposure, like you could start to trace these things. But nutrition, malnutrition, I mean, obviously hydration is right there, weaves right into that. So malnutrition, dehydration are hand in hand, and the foods that you're eating, perhaps not delivering the proper nutrition to you. Like, so that those jive. EMF exposure, like makes perfect sense, right? This is what Don and David talk about. This is what Tom talks about too, is too much exposure to EMFs can cause illness. Well, here we have a better understanding, and Dolph talked about that too. We have a better understanding as to the why, like what's actually happening. Well, you're dehydrating yourself, or you are unstructuring the water inside your body in a myriad of ways.
And don't forget the fourth one, stress and anxiety.
And stress and anxiety, which
Yeah.
of course also plays its role on the quality or lack thereof of the water inside your body. And so without that, wow, it's just, this was such a, like I said, such an aha moment.
Yeah. It's almost
And
like the not the right expression, but like the elephant in the room. It's like I was thinking about Don and David as well. It's like we went down the list and they wrote this 800-page book, which I have on my bedside table, and I'm sure they must get into water in there somewhere, but it didn't come up in our conversation, and yet it's the thing that all these other planks sort of hinge off of. It seems.
yeah,
Duh, like duh, duh,
duh,
duh, duh.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm actually, I'm ashamed to say, Mike, I'm on well water, and I know that the water quality is good. It's like better than tap water. I have no doubt about that. But I have not had a water filter. I've not used one because I've felt like, all right, I'm on well water. I know that I'm doing all right. But I've had this suspicion for a while now that I'm wrong, that I've been mistaken. And so I think it just arrived as we're speaking, ordered a Berkey water filter,
Yeah.
which I think most folks will stand by as a high quality water filter.
Yeah.
I've got the Analemma wand, which is also arriving today. I haven't used that yet. We had Dolph on.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about it, but I've never actually used it. So I have that arriving. And then I've been taking a look at waterislife.shop, just at some of the other opportunities here to improve the water in my house, the water that I'm around. So like a proper water filter for the shower. I'm going to check out this one solution that she was talking about, the aqua. What is it called?
I did write it down. The spring aqua, I believe.
Spring aqua. Yeah. Like, gonna check that out because it just feels, why have 20 devices when you can have one?
Well, and I keep hammering this one is findaspring.com. Like, and I never heard the term forging in relation to water before, which I loved.
No, nor I. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? I got to tip my hat to my wife, Ruthie. When we were driving home from New Hampshire over 4th of July weekend, there was a cute little yard sale very near. We had just left the house. We were like 10 minutes from my folks, and they pulled off to a guy named, he had the best name. I think it was Pudgy Rogers was his name. And classic New Hampshire old timer with a big old thick accent. And he had several large glass jugs for sale, which we bought. They didn't have tops on them, but I figured out that pretty universal. Even like the tops I had from like old kombucha bottles fit right on them. So that's a new part of our arsenal, is some of these big like 5-gallon glass jugs that we intend to fill with spring water whenever possible. And just a few weeks ago, maybe in June, we did a workshop at a Shokin Center with Andrew Faust, my permaculture instructor, where we located a spring and spent an afternoon clearing it and making it so that it was accessible, and beat back some brush and arranged some rocks just so, and so that it pooled just enough but not too much, and had enough flow that it ran clear. And so there's a spring we just liberated out of Shokin Center that I think I'm gonna bring those new glass jugs over there later today and fill them up. Because we get lax about it, and I think I have an attitude of uh, almost like in the don't ask, don't tell. Like I don't know if I don't know. The water seems fine. Maybe I don't want to look into it more out of laziness. I have a Berkey filter too that I got really for emergencies. Like if we lose power,
Mm.
and it's got these big honking black filters in it, but it's metal, and so like the water's not exposed to natural light, right? So it's like even if you're running the water through the Berkey, why wouldn't you want to put it in some glass and let it bask in some sunlight? And it's just really funny, Ben, because I think we can get really caught up in like all these steps to get water back to where it already is, coming out of the earth. Man, it's really inspiring, right? To like really commit to upping our water game as aqua beings, or what did she say? Aqua sapiens.
Aqua sapiens. It's empowering to up our water game, and also to double down on the defense of water, as she's doing with the American Water Trust, is reclaiming these indigenous people's access to water, but all of ours. We see this all time and time again. What is bottled water?
I love that she's a .love user as well, because so are we. The mammals .love and hoot .love, and I think there's a couple times I wanted to send Ruthie's song "My Baby Drinks Water" to some of our guests, but I really want to send it to Isabel, because I think she'll really resonate with that song.
I think she will as well. All right, the water journey continues.
Yeah, I think, like you said, I love that you used that express. It's like the quote, the one quote on the front of Ishmael is, from now on I will divide my life into two halves, before having read Ishmael and after having read Ishmael. And I feel like this was sort of a watermark conversation.
Before Isabel, before Isabel, after Isabel.
Yeah, and just what a jewel of a soul. She just, again, another pun, she pours out the wisdom with such grace and articulation and joy and willingness to share and educate and empower. And may we all carry that light forward, as we march through the world.
Amen. Well, folks, if you have a terrain transfer, I'm going to start that again. Well, folks, if you have a terrain transformation story that you want to share with us, send me an email to ben@terraintheory.net. Nothing you heard here today should be misconstrued as medical advice, as neither Mike nor I are medical professionals. However, this is common sense advice, folks. Hydrate properly. Remember that you are light, you are love, you are water, and you are your primary healthcare provider. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next one.